Hey there everyone, welcome back to Utility Sports. Really excited to continue our off-season preview series here on the channel. This time, focusing in on the Orlando Magic, who got a fresh new look. And I want you to leave a like and subscribe to the channel today if you do enjoy the content, especially as much as I enjoy those brand new Magic uniforms. Going back with that retro look, I love this new logo. I'm extremely excited about the future of Orlando Magic basketball as a result, and I hope you Magic fans are as well. Let's not waste any more time and jump here into that video preview. What are we going to cover in today's video? Well, we're going to start with a season recap. I always think looking at where this team currently is, what's the most recent information, news we have on this team, and how did they perform this most recent year. I think Orlando is a very telling story to talk about as well, with how they performed this most recent season under head coach Jamal Mosley. We'll then look at the NBA draft in 2025. Who could they consider drafting? And two distinct pathways this Magic team could go about building their roster, including one really fun pathway that I haven't really discussed as much as I maybe should have on the channel up to this point, and I'm really excited to cover that in today's video. We're also going to look at their NBA free agency situation. Here's a little disclaimer. I don't think Orlando is going to be opening up the wallet too much this offseason. We'll discuss why a little bit later in this video. And then, of course, before the conclusion of today's video, I will give an early outlook for next year. How many wins do I expect this team to have? And what is the organizational direction for this team going forward? And how do they get better? A lot of that will stem from some internal development for their two-star players, which we'll discuss in today's video as well. So let's get into that season recap here. The Magic this most recent season, kind of a disappointing year, all things considered. Just a 41-41 record. They did scrape by with a 500 win-loss percentage, but I do think ultimately the disappointment really stems from losing in the way that they did in the first round of the NBA playoffs. They, of course, earned the 7th seed in the Eastern Conference through the play-in where they beat Atlanta. And then unfortunately, just things unraveled for them a little bit in the playoffs. Now, I do think there was a lot this year that kind of prevented them from really ever hitting that true stride that I think this team could be capable of. You look at the injuries that they sustained. Paolo Banchero missed so much time, especially early in the year after he was really balling out the first week or two of the season. Then you look at Mo Wagner missing such an extended duration of time. I don't think enough people nationally really understand how important he was to this Magic team, especially from an offensive standpoint coming off the bench. Jalen Suggs missed a lot of time. I thought he had really taken a big step forward this year when he was healthy. Just couldn't stay on the court enough, and that was, I think, a huge bummer and a huge limiting factor for Orlando. We saw how much they struggled once he went out of that lineup. Franz Wagner missed a decent amount of time. So you're looking at really 4 of their most skilled offensive players, and then there's just a litany of injuries across the rest of the roster too, where Wendell Carter misses some time. Player XYZ misses some time, and it just became an uphill battle for Orlando a bit in terms of the health bug and trying to keep that rotation together. And they played a whole bunch of guys a lot of games this year. Jett Howard played a lot of games. Anthony Black played a lot of games. And there was really not a lot of continuity because of that. And I also think they were just missing some real top-end offensive talent, especially on the nights where you didn't have Suggs, you didn't have Paulo, you didn't have Franz. That becomes extremely challenging to overcome in a league where the talent is at all-time highs. When you look across every single team, even some of the worst teams in the league have very fun, talented offensive players, and Orlando at times was just outmatched offensively. You see that in their team offensive rating, where they had the 4th worst team offensive rating in the NBA. This team was putrid offensively. There is no ifs, ands, or buts about it. There's a ton of reasons why. I think really you have to start at the top of the ladder. While yes, Paulo and Franz both did miss some time with injuries, I think they had some setbacks this year in terms of their own individual play because of those injuries. While the raw numbers don't say that, hey, Paulo and Franz were disappointing because they put up very good points per game, I think you look at them as the true leaders of this roster, as they definitely are, but they need to develop internally still. Paulo needs to really improve his handle. I think this is one of his biggest concerns for me going forward with the next 5 to 10 years of Orlando Magic basketball. If you want him to be a better player and have a much better playoff resume long-term than a Julius Randle type player, which was a pretty common pre-draft comparison, he needs to begin shaping his game more like Jason Tatum and away from the bully ball, early pickup, mid-range jump shot kind of play style. And the best way to do that is to get deeper in the paint and to have better gathers, have a better spin move, and have a more functional handle with a tween hezi, with a crossover, with just functionality that he doesn't have right now. And listen, Magic fans, some of you are going to be very accurately saying, well, the spacing doesn't help either, and I completely agree. This is another testament to an area where Orlando just has to improve their roster in terms of the three-point shooting that they put around Paolo, the spacing, the gravity, and of course some rim pressure would really help this team as well. So I think Orlando has a lot of ways to help Paolo kind of reach new heights offensively individually, which, by the way, if you're a Magic fan, you should be really excited, because if Paolo's just scratching the surface now with how productive he's been, imagine how good he could become with some significant internal development and a better kind of core around him that fits his game a little bit and kind of alleviates some of his own difficulties at times too. And then Franz, when it comes to his offseason work, it really starts with that jump shot. It can't be as inconsistent and unreliable as it's been over the last 12 plus months. I think for Franz, he has to find a level of consistency with his pull-up jump shooting, especially look in the playoffs, the kinds of shots that the best players in the world get. You look at what Halliburton's done this postseason. You look at what Shea, of course, has continually been able to do in the playoffs. Jalen Williams for Oklahoma City. You need to have a pull-up jump shot. You need to be able to really stretch the floor and do it off of a live handle if you want to be one of your team's go-to players. Franz Wagner, he is that for Orlando. They paid him like that. They need some significant shooting development and consistency from him long-term. But there is still a lot to be optimistic about. And I don't want my criticisms to sound like complaints, because there's a very distinct difference between those two things. This Magic team is still very well positioned long term, and I still want to reiterate how excited I am about this roster, because there is a lot still to build off of in terms of both flexibility and successes. The successes, they are one of the best defensive teams in the league. Going into the season, I predicted them as a top 4 defense. They ranked in right at number 2, kind of right in a bunch with 3 and 4. They were kind of a head and shoulder below Oklahoma City, which is what I predicted coming into the season. I thought OKC was going to be far and away the best defensive team. That proved to be the case, but Orlando was very, very good defensively this year, and I think even with a litany of injuries, you have to be very impressed with what Jamal Mosley's been able to do with this team in terms of getting them to play hard every single night. Of course, you have a roster that wants to defend, knows how to compete on that end of the floor, and I think with their kind of defensive structure in place, the sky is really the limit here for this team. They can go a number of different ways, and as they continue to find offensive improvements, whether it's schematically or internal development or roster changes over time, this Magic team is going to be able to really improve their team quickly. Jalen Suggs, I think, again, very shortened season, played just about 30 games, but when he was on the court, averaged a career high in points this year, shot the ball really well. I think this was a real A-plus kind of season for Jalen Suggs when he was on the court, so I think there's a lot to bank on for him moving forward if he can stay on the court. Then you look at a few of their contributors. Goga Bitadze, another really good season. I think one of the most underrated players in the entire NBA. Anthony Black played a good deal of minutes this year. I thought he impressed in those minutes. Now, is he the best long-term guard option for Orlando when it comes to that spacing context? Maybe, maybe not. We'll see how he continues growing and developing as a shooter in terms of not only the actual efficiency, which some Magic fans will point to, but you also have to consider volume, gravity, the way that he gets defended. And I think that's an important kind of nuanced context that could help Orlando long term if they find better shooting. Tristan Da Silva had a pretty good rookie season too. I want to give him some love here in this video. And then KCP, a pretty disappointing season. Now, I do think with how poorly he started the year, he kind of started to find his rhythm later in the season. Now, ultimately, it was a little too late at that point in time. And I do think with the kind of host of injuries Orlando had, KCP never really found a rhythm around that to the degree that you were kind of hoping he would when Orlando signed him after having been such a critical championship caliber player for Denver the past couple of seasons. But I do think there was a pretty significant difference playing with Nikola Jokic to what he was playing with in Orlando. And, you know, we've seen KCP kind of liable to these drops before. When he was playing in Washington, he was not nearly the same caliber of player as he was with the Lakers, playing with LeBron James. So KCP, if you're looking at internal development here, Paolo and Franz taking the next step in their games is going to help someone like KCP if he's still on the roster going into next season. Now we get into the fun stuff. talking about what this team can do to improve. And the NBA draft's a great place for them. They have 4 picks in this year's draft, 2 of them in the first round, 2 of them in the second round. Pick 16, pick number 25 via Denver. They have pick 46, and they also have pick 57 via Boston. Those are 4 assets that they could look to use to replenish some of their depth, especially as this roster starts to get more expensive. And they do have some pretty well-defined needs at this point in time. They need point guard play. They need another guy who can really handle the basketball. They relied on Corey Joseph a lot this past season to be kind of a go-to ball handler for them. That is not sustainable. It reminds me, this is going to be a throwback for some Magic fans, this reminds me of like 2019 when DJ Augustine won them a playoff game against Toronto. Okay, that's not sustainable. Yes, DJ Augustine had some really great moments for Orlando, but I think Magic fans can attest to how unreliable that is when it comes to team building, and I think Orlando's really searching and hunting for a build-around point guard in some form or fashion, which we'll talk about how they could maybe do that via trade later. They're also looking for center depth with Goga Bitadze's contract, Wendell Carter Jr.'s contract about to escalate going into the next couple of seasons here. You're looking for guys who can be cheap center options. So we'll talk about some options for that. And then, of course, just at the heart of it, shooting. Whether it's a big man, whether it's a wing, which they've continually drafted the last couple of years with Jet Howard, Tristan da Silva, or if they do ultimately find a way to draft a point guard, the guys need to be able to shoot the ball. They need more gravity. They need more three-point shooting. I can't reiterate that enough. You've probably heard the word gravity 4, 5, 6 times already in this video. There's a reason for that. Orlando needs way more of it. The Magic need guys who can shoot the ball, and that defenses are scared of letting shoot the ball because it will just open up the court. Spacing isn't just where your offensive players stand, it's where the defense stands while they're guarding you. And if you have really good shooters, capital S shooters, it's a lot harder, it's a lot scarier to help off of them in the gaps, and I think that would really help Paolo Banchero a lot. So could they do this in the NBA draft? Well, there are 2 distinct pathways for this team to choose from. And I want to hear your guys' thoughts down in the comment section below. So Magic fans, comment down below right now which pathway you want them to take. Do you want them to go out, improve now, and be aggressive with those 2025 NBA draft picks where they make a big trade and target a veteran caliber player who can be a starter for them in that backcourt? Or do you want them to maybe keep those 2025 draft picks and maybe slow build? Now, it's a little tricky for Orlando to really do that in terms of play time. You're going to see a lot of Lakeland Magic run for whoever ultimately gets drafted probably. You know, that's not been atypical at all for someone like Jet Howard, who spent a lot of time down in the G League after being a draft pick in the first round. In fact, a lottery pick for Orlando. So there's not really, I'm not dissing anybody by saying, oh, they're going to spend time in the G League. It's just the reality here, especially with Orlando's depth right now and the caliber and quality of players that they're playing that contribute to such a good team defense. So for me, I do kind of lean toward trading their 2025 draft picks, especially with what selections they have. 16, 25. While yes, they're solid first-round picks, they're not premium blue chip top 10 selections. And while I'm a big proponent believer in the idea that you can find talent anywhere in the draft, I firmly do believe that. It is very well articulated throughout NBA history. Manu Ginobili, Nikola Jokic, the list goes on and on. There's so many guys. Draymond Green. There's so many players that have been value picks. Nick Claxton's another recent example. Like, you don't have to only have first-round picks to find good players. Orlando has 4 picks in this draft. They could definitely find very good players across the board here. But the reality is, those guys aren't going to be instant contributors immediately, and some of those guys are, of course, extreme outliers. You're not going to find Nikola Jokic in the second round in this year's draft. I would be very willing to put money on it. So, which way do you want to go? And I think specifically for me, if you go with the keep the picks route, there are some interesting names you could look at. We're going to mostly talk about first-round targets here. Someone like Jace Richardson, who might slide just a little bit on draft night, had such a tremendous season for himself at Michigan State. Measured in quite poorly at the combine, just a hair over 6 feet tall flat. And I think Jace specifically is a guy who could return really good value because he's a dribble pass shoot prospect, very secure with the ball. And I've talked at length about how I think his best case scenario is landing next to a jumbo playmaker, someone who's going to kind of take on a majority of the ball handling responsibility to begin with. And landing in Orlando next to Franz and Paulo definitely checks that box for him, which allows you to, kind of utilize his catch and shoot game, play off the ball a bit, but then of course he can be another go-to ball handler for you. This gives you some long-term alleviation away from the Corey Joseph run. Now, Magic fans are going to promptly say in the chat, I'm sure, that, hey, we don't want to draft a small guard, doesn't fit our team defense identity. I totally understand that. So what are some other options? You could look at Cedric Coward, someone who measured in with a 7'2" wingspan, a true 6'5" wing without shoes on. He's got a very NBA-ready frame and a fairly NBA-ready skill set. He can shoot the ball. That's one of his best traits coming into the league. And of course, with his length, there's a lot of upside there for him to grow into defensively. Now, he's a little bit of an older prospect. Spent some time at Division III, then moved up to Division I, was ultimately going to play for Duke, but now has kept his name in the NBA draft. You could also look at a couple bigs. Thomas Sorber, elite rim protector coming out of Georgetown. That's really his bread and butter in this year's class. Otherwise, you get more of a dynamic big man in Asa Newell, who has some really interesting touch, gets on the offensive glass very, very well, and of course can be a lob finisher for you, kind of helping in that rim gravity component that I mentioned earlier for Orlando. You could also look at some guys who can be defensive pieces, and the rich get richer here defensively. If you look at someone like Rasheer Fleming or Adu Thiero, while this doesn't help with their kind of dynamism offensively, this doesn't help with their shooting a ton if you go with Thiero. What it does do is it really makes one of your strengths an even bigger strength, and we saw how OKC doubling down on their defense, getting Alex Caruso and Isaiah Hartenstein, just made them head and shoulders better than everybody in the regular season. Could going out and finding Rasheer Fleming, Adu Thiero, kind of help strengthen an already great unit defensively going forward with more special athleticism, whether it's Thiero's leaping and functional tools, or if you're looking at Rasheer Fleming's 6'9", 7'5" wingspan. Like, he's just a kind of creative player. You get in the 2K builder, you're making someone like this to play lockdown. That's exactly what Rasheer Fleming can do for you as a help defender, can guard out in the perimeter a bit. Now, I do think there are some awareness issues in terms of his off-ball IQ and understanding exactly where to be and when, but he has a lot of the physical traits to make up for any mistakes he does make. Otherwise, you look at maybe offensive prospects, Nolan Traore, Walter Clayton Jr. Of course, Traore, the big question mark with him is the shooting, but he comes in with very good natural positional size. He can definitely play the point guard spot in terms of the playmaking. The question, though, and especially for Orlando, is the shooting ever going to be good enough? I don't think that's the risk that Orlando should look at taking at either pick 16 or 25 in this draft. So Walter Clayton Jr., someone who I think his biggest strength coming in, even though he doesn't get to the free throw line a lot, has some of his own flaws as a prospect. You're looking at a guy who we know can shoot the basketball. And I think Magic fans would gravitate pretty well to a guy from Florida who won a national championship with the Gators. So I think Walter Clayton Jr., I think, would be a welcomed addition for sure to this roster. You could look at some skilled bigs. Danny Wolf, a dribble pass shoot big man, I think would be very fun there in Orlando. Maxime Reynaud, someone who has really emerged over the last 4 or 5 months with a strong senior season for the Stanford Cardinal, where he stretched his game, expanded out to the three-point line a little bit more, and got to show off a lot of his mobility and fluidity skills. While he doesn't have the best rim protection numbers, I do think toward the end of the season he started to showcase more of his shot blocking prowess, and I do think for a team like the Magic, they could definitely maximize his defensive talent with the amount of point of attack defenders they already have surrounding and insulating him there. And then Liam McNeely, this is just a shooter, and it's not the sexy pick, but if he's there at number 25 and the Magic say, we need shooting, draft the former Montverde Academy sniper who worked really well off of Cooper Flagg and Derek Queen, maybe this is the guy that could help Orlando just stretching the floor just a little bit more in the NBA. So if you don't want to keep the picks, maybe you go and look at making a trade. Here are some potential guys that could make significant sense for Orlando, but I need you to hear me out because there's very realistic reasons why Orlando won't do this specifically. Trading for Trae Young. While yes, Trae Young is an awesome player, one of the best point guards in the league and one of the best offensive creators in the league, he would almost undoubtedly improve Orlando's offense overnight, make them so much better. He comes with a significant price tag in two ways. Not only are you going to have to trade a very decent amount of stuff to get him, you're also going to have to be content with paying him both now and long term. And with Orlando already slated to pay Jalen Suggs, already slated to pay Franz Wagner, and already slated to pay Paulo Banchero with his extension coming up here this offseason, it's very, very unlikely that Orlando goes after Trae Young unless Jalen Suggs is in that deal going back to Atlanta, which would be fascinating. LaMelo Ball, again, this is another guy who's already gotten paid by Charlotte. Does Orlando want to commit to him? I think that's a real question mark. I don't see it happening. Darius Garland from the Cavaliers. This is another, hey, if we trade Jalen Suggs for Darius Garland, could it help both sides? Suggs, of course, has missed time. Darius Garland's missed some time at big moments for Cleveland. Could the two kind of organize a swap where maybe you're looking at Jalen Suggs and a little bit of draft capital going to Cleveland for Darius Garland? Garland instantly becomes such an immediate impact piece for the Magic in their backcourt, a really good shot creator, a very high volume ball handler in the pick and roll, someone who can create good offense consistently for them, and of course has so much touch, one of the best float games in the entire league. So Garland could definitely bring a little bit of juice to Orlando's offense, and I think the Magic have the defense to build around him and support him in a big way. And we saw, Cleveland was able to do that. So it's not impossible to build a good team defense at all around Darius Garland. You just have to have the right pieces. I think Orlando does. And for Cleveland, in the kind of flip side of this, getting Jalen Suggs would make their defense really, really good with him, Evan Mobley, Jared Allen, Isaac Okoro still there. Like, that would be a very, very good team defense. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. And then you'd have Donovan Mitchell kind of slating into being more of that true point guard. Maybe not his true natural position, but with his internal development over the last 2-3 years, definitely something he's done a little bit more of. And I do think if you have another ball handler like Suggs around him, if they're healthy at the right time, Cleveland would still be a beast to try and overcome in the East. Anthony Simons, of course, he's been heavily rumored to Orlando for a long time. He's a player who I think makes legitimate sense. There's ways to build trade packages here around the contracts of Jonathan Isaac and Cole Anthony. Anthony Simons won't be quite as expensive as someone like Garland or LaMelo or Trae Young as well, which I think is a pretty important money-saving aspect here. And you could still look to keep Jalen Suggs in this kind of package. Kobe White's another sweet spot kind of player because his contract is affordable. Chicago, you never know what the Bulls are going to do, so maybe you can fleece them in some way, shape, or form. It's not the first time in the last decade that the Magic have fleeced the Bulls if something happens here. Think about that Nikola Vucevic trade and how poorly that's aged for Chicago. Could Kobe White to Orlando end up with the same kind of resolve? Possibly. But here's a discussion I want to have, and this is one that, honestly, I don't think I've given enough time to. I think it's a really important discussion, and it's trading up in the draft. We've all talked about Orlando trading out of their picks, trading their picks back, trading their picks to future years, trading their picks for win-now players. We haven't talked about them sneaking up in the draft, and they actually are very well positioned to do so if they want to. They have interesting ways to get off of salary. I could see them working with a variety of teams. You think about what they could give to Philadelphia to eat Paul George's contract. That would be very fascinating. The Magic are really deep right now. And while, listen, I don't think the Magic should go out after Paul George, I do think they could put together a pretty interesting offer where they give Philadelphia 3-4 players that are still somewhat expensive altogether and find a way to move up to 3 or find a way to move up to 6 or 7 or 8 somewhere in this draft because they have multiple draft picks. 8's probably not realistic with Brooklyn, but you understand the idea. And in here, you could look at Jeremiah Fears. Maybe they move up just a little bit in this draft. Maybe jump into that 11 to 13 range. Do they walk out with someone like Yegor Demon, who, listen, I don't love, but this has Magic written all over it. A big point guard, someone who fits the, hey, he's tall category, which typically is something Orlando is looking at going into draft night. They like their length, they like their height, they like their positional size. Yegor Demon checks those boxes. To me, he doesn't check a lot of the other ones when it comes to actually being a point guard, but he's tall. And Kasparas Jakučionis would be another interesting name as well for Orlando. Now, the issue with these is you're kind of drafting and waiting a little bit. So if you're Orlando and if the idea is to win now, this doesn't really help you with that. Fears, I think, is a few years away from being a solid NBA guard. Yegor Demon's a long ways away from being a solid NBA guard. And Jakučionis, I think, is probably a year and a half, 2 years away from being a respectable NBA guard in terms of winning. But I do think if you're looking at the long-term timeline, which is a very respectable thing to do with how young Orlando's roster is, Fears, Demon, Jakučionis, they all fit in long-term. So I think there's a lot to uncover here. I think there's a lot that you could do to kind of sell yourself on Orlando trying to actually aggressively trade up in the draft. They have draft pick flexibility. They have ways to make deals happen if they want to. They have some interesting salary they could attach. They have some young pieces. They have Anthony Black. Like, there's ways for them to move up if they want to. It would be interesting to see if they do. And I haven't talked about that really at all the entire cycle, and I actually kind of love that idea for them. Maybe even all the way up to number 2 with San Antonio. No, that's not going to happen. I'm not buying into any of that. Spurs fans, don't get mad. I was just joking. But the reality here, like, for Orlando, they could go after a big name, although I don't think that makes a ton of sense from the cap perspective. So if they do it the other way, they could move up in the draft, get rookie control on a guy like Fears or Demon or Yakachonis, kind of fill in that point guard position long term, figure it out, and from there, you got to be feeling pretty good about Orlando's future. When it comes to free agency, and you might be saying, well, why don't they just go out in free agency and target somebody big time there? Well, it's just not going to happen. Okay, they are projected to be over the first apron right now by about $3.5 million. And the reason for that is some of these bigger team options. Now, if they don't accept all of these team options, they could get out of that first apron and maybe even out of the luxury tax, all things to get considered. But you look at some of their team options. Mo Wagner, $11 million. Could they opt out of that and try and get him back on a little bit of a friendlier number, especially after injury? Possibly. Gary Harris, $7.5 million. I would not be picking up that team option. I just would not. Corey Joseph, $3.5 million. Probably see that team option picked up. Caleb Houston, $2.2 million. Probably will see that team option picked up just because it's really cheap. If you compare that to the minimum contract in the NBA, it's, pennies. So Caleb Houston will definitely probably still be in Orlando. Corey Joseph probably will be. But that Mo Wagner and Gary Harris contracts are really where Orlando could save some money, maybe try and dip out of that first apron a little bit. If they get Mo Wagner back at $9 million, maybe get Gary Harris back at $5 million, all of a sudden you're out of that first apron altogether. It gives you a little bit of extra added flexibility. And then from there, they could maybe even find ways to save a little bit more money and get out of the tax completely if they find a way to salary dump this offseason. Could it be someone like Contavious Caldwell-Pope, who, again, I talked about him having a disappointing season in his first year in Orlando. You look at someone like Jonathan Isaac, who his contract's actually very movable, even though it's 4 years left on that deal. The final 2 of those years are completely non-guaranteed, and then the season after this upcoming one is only $8 million guaranteed. So really, there's not a lot of money left on that deal. It gives Orlando some significant flexibility, and if a team wants to trade for Jonathan Isaac, they could almost look at it as an expiring contract nearly. Again, $8 million owed in 26-27, but that's really not that much, especially with how the cap is continuing to grow. So a team could definitely look at Jonathan Isaac and say, yeah, we could take this contract in, gives us some long-term flexibility. Cole Anthony, a 1+1 team option, that's so movable. You could look at that as an expiring this year and an expiring next year, which is, one of the best parts about team options. It gives teams so much flexibility with whether they want to carry that salary moving forward or not. For the Magic, could definitely see them just declining that team option long term to get out of the tax, save money in certain ways. But for another team, they could look at Cole Anthony as a walking trade exception at $13 million. So it would be very fascinating to see how a team would use him. Goga Bitadze, of course, a very good value budget player, making around $8 million annually. This is very, very movable on a descending contract. And then Jett Howard, former first-round pick. I don't think he's really worked out for the Magic. I didn't like that pick when they made it. I would not have drafted Jett Howard in their spot. You can go back to my analysis on that. I just was not a fan. I think that's aged pretty well, that take has. It's, I think, disappointing with the way his development has gone up to this point. Could they look to move him to a team that's maybe trying to get a reclamation project? Definitely possible, but I think the biggest takeaway here, if you're a Magic fan looking at this is unusual spending, and this is the byproduct of having some expensive players in Jalen Suggs, Franz Wagner. This is the cost of hitting on 2 really good picks in the top 10 in a single draft. You have to pay them. And then Paulo's going to be due an extension, and this is going to be problematic for this team moving forward, but that's a good problem to have. It means you have talent. It means you have guys who are worth getting paid. Now you have to do all the other tightrope walking extremely well. You have to figure out every budget contract. You have to hit on the $16, $17, $18 million contracts. So again, Wendell Carter's number is about to jump up. That's one that looks a little scary. We'll see what happens, but I think Orlando's a very interesting spot right now, but not a spot that's going to be spending in free agency at all this offseason. I'd be shocked if they sign anybody to a contract bigger than the minimum this offseason. So when it comes to next year, what's a realistic expectation for this team? I think it's very easy to project them to win 45 to 50 games. That's a 4 to 9 win improvement from this past year, and that's with the injury bug biting them pretty badly. I think if this team is healthy, if they're able to put together 2, 3, 4 months of healthy, consistent basketball, they're going to be a team that in the East next year, which looks a little down because of Boston's injuries. We'll see what happens with Porzingis. Drew, will they blow that team up? Drew would be an interesting get for Orlando on kind of a shorter term buy if they wanted to do that, but I probably won't. But 45 to 50 wins definitely think is possible. I do think they need to find significantly more offensive talent to really bolster their playoff chances, not in terms of making the playoffs, but advancing in the postseason. I'm still very concerned. Now, that offensive talent, it can come in two ways, right? It could come through acquisitions, whether it's drafts or trades or signings, or it could come through internal development. And the two guys, again, I'm putting the onus on them here in this video. It's got to be Paolo and Franz. Paolo needs to continue developing his handle. He needs to take significant strides forward in the half court, playing into traffic, getting to the rim more. I want to see his rim volume increase, and I want to see his rim efficiency increase. Right now, those are the two big red flags for me going forward with his career. And I think Franz really just needs to find that shooting touch and a real resurgence into who a lot of people expected him to be coming out of Michigan. So if you're Orlando, there's a lot to be optimistic about, but there's also, you have to look in the mirror and look at some of the harsh truths right now, and the team's just not good enough. It's been showcased the last 2 years where they came up short in the postseason. This team's fun. This team's really good. There's room to grow, and that's an okay thing to accept. That's an okay thing to admit, because without admitting it and accepting it, you're not going to get further. And I think if you're Orlando, taking that first step of saying, okay, what are we lacking? How are we lacking it? How do we fix it? That's the first step to fixing it and ultimately getting better. And I'm very excited for Orlando and watching how they ultimately decide to improve this team over the next 2, 3, 4 years, because I do think the sky is the limit for this team. Thank you all so much for watching. I really hope you guys did enjoy. If you did, make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more NBA content, and we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.